Hi everybody, welcome to the Hobby Hood. I am Ben Rogers, known in the Society of Creative Anachronism as Matthias, and I'm continuing on with my series, definitely geared toward people in the Society of Creative Anachronism, but anybody that's interested, in calligraphy, the introduction of the foundational hand. This video, we're going to be going over the 7 characteristics of writing. This video is coming out a few days later than I wanted to, and you have my sincerest apologies, but I'm super excited. I had to move things around in my house to be able to make room for this. It is my drafting table. I've been wanting one of these for years, and I have a friend who needed to get some garage space back, and he and his wife gave me this drafting table. If you're not familiar with one, in the future I might do a video on drafting tables and what make them so awesome. But I'm just super excited. This slanted surface can rotate all the way straight up and down. It can lay flat. I've got this bar that will slide side to side with a built-in protractor that I can move my straight edge and lock it into a certain angle. I can get it straight flat to draw lines. I can take my ruler out and put it in the top. And then I can get straight vertical lines so I can get crisp 90-degree angles and everything in between. It's useful in measuring and analyzing calligraphy, which you'll see in this video. It's a wonderful tool. And the other side that you can't see has a flat tabletop that I can do illumination work on and have pieces and things stored on the other side of the table. Making room for this, getting it delivered, getting it set up, just took some extra time, and I apologize for that. So the 7 characteristics of writing are all about the elements that change within one script to another. These are the 7 things that we analyze and look at to determine what we're doing good, what we can do better on, but also how the foundational hand that we've started looking at with our skeletal forms. Once we have that, all we have to do is understand these 7 things and look at how a script changes. And those skills that we start building now with our foundational hand can translate into the other scripts. There are 7 of them. I remember them with the anachronism AWS nods. And you'll see a sheet that I use that comes from Edward Johnston's 7 characteristics of handwriting. So we're going to look at the angle of the pen, the weight of the letters, the shape of the letters, the number of strokes, the order of strokes, the direction of those strokes, and the speed. Okay, our first characteristic of writing is our pen angle. What we are talking about with pen angle is we look at our baseline, or we can look at our X height, or also called the waistline. And we're looking at the angle that the pen tip creates to that line. Here, that would be a 20-degree angle, 30-degree angle, 45 degrees, right? And now, each of these boxes is showing that pen angle changes the thicknesses and the thinnesses of our vertical and horizontal strokes. At 0 degrees, we end up with our widest vertical strokes we can and our absolute thinnest horizontal strokes. When we go up to 20 degrees, then that vertical stroke gets just a little narrower and that horizontal stroke gets a little bit fatter. Again, if we go up to 45 degrees, then our horizontal and vertical strokes are the same thickness. And at 0 degrees, we have the thinnest vertical stroke we can and our widest horizontal strokes. Different periods of time, different scripts of calligraphy are going to use different pen angles. And it's important that we understand when we're sitting down to do calligraphy what that pen angle needs to be. There's even a few examples in some scripts where most of the script is in one angle, but a couple of the letters might have a different angle, a steeper angle or something like that. So now we need to figure out, how do we figure out in a script what angle our pen should be? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get a ruler and put our ruler where on the bottom of the letters we are going to pretty much touch and be even across those forms. Then grab a pencil or a pen and make a line. And do that across the example that we've printed off. It's okay if we're not exactly on the baseline, but it can help us analyze a particular script that we want to either closely imitate or even try to reproduce. So that's step one. Step two is I'm going to look for flat places that I can tell where the pen was flat, because just like with those boxes, you could see in the corners of those boxes, the flat parts, we're going to be able to see those same kind of trademarks in the letters. Like the top of the U right here has this flat part. So I'm going to put my ruler across the top there, and I'm going to draw a line going to the baseline. And I'm going to look for just a few examples of those flat parts on letters coming from the tops of the letters, and those are called ascenders. So I want to mark several, serifs. I'm going to mark several of these coming from the baseline of that all the way forward. And what we'll find is on this particular example, we have a number of different angles going on. Okay. Then we want to use a protractor. I've got one built into my table, and we are going to measure where these lines come up to. So there's one that's 34 degrees. I'm going to come to this next one, and we're going to line it up. And that one is 48 degrees. 48 degrees. I have one that's here that's at 38 degrees. And I'm just going to measure all sorts of these angles. That one's 41. $44. Another 44. With all these angles, we can average them out. So here are several that are around 44, 41. We have a 48, a couple lower. So it looks like about 40 degrees to 45 degrees is about what this manuscript was written with. Although there's some definite variance there. Okay, so our weight of the letters is our second characteristics of writing that we're going to be studying. And what this is talking about is all of these letters, all of these B's are all the same height in terms of the physical measurement of the baseline to the top of the letter. But when we look at it, we can definitely see we have one that is really nice and kind of bold, but a balanced letter. one that's really thin, one that's a little bit more but still looks kind of weak. This one can be a nice kind of weight to this letter here, and then a really big bold B. And the thing that changes these, they're made with the same stroke, same height, but the thing that's changing is the size of the pen that these are written with. That's what these boxes to the side mean. If I was to grab a pen and hold it at a 90-degree angle, and I made just a box going to the side with that, that is one pen nib in height. And we measure our calligraphy letters in pen nibs. So this nib I picked up just happens to meet this letter. So when we count the boxes, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 6 pen nibs in height. This is a skeletal structure, so it doesn't have any. This one here that looks kind of weak, when we count it, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pen nibs. So it's twice as tall as this letter in relationship to the pen nibs. Here we have one that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And like I said, both of these are balanced, nice looking letters. And this really bold one is 4 pen nibs. So we now need to figure out how do we look at a text and figure out what size pen they used for that document. To find our pen width in order to reproduce or analyze a particular text, you're going to want a pair of dividers. And I have this pair of dividers. I'll try to get close, see if I can focus in. Kind of like a compass, but it's got two very sharp points on the end. And what I'm going to do is come to one of my letters, and we're going to take this I, or it's actually, this is Joseph, or so it's Latin, it's the IJ. And we're going to put our dividers on this line that we marked previously for our angle, and I am going to dial in these dividers until I get to a width that, holding it at that constant pen angle for that letter that we've marked, can I trace over that letter and make all those strokes? And on this one, I can. So that's going to be consistent for all of our letters. At least all of the letters in this form. I'm then going to take it and I am going to measure. So I'm looking at about 1/8 of an inch, just a little bit shy. But I'm going to match this up with my pen nibs to get a nib of that size. And I could hold this up to, there we go, that's a fit. This is a 1.5 millimeter nib. So if I wanted to, I could use this nib and holding it at the correct pen angle, yep, I can trace all of these letter forms and I could reproduce that with a 1.5 millimeter nib. So that's how we figure out the weight for the letters that we're going to use on a script from an extant document. Okay, when we're talking about the shapes of letters, within any particular script or hand, there are 2 letters that we want to pay particular attention to. One is the O, the other is the N. And this shouldn't make too big of a surprise to you after we did all of the skeletal letters. Here we have 4 examples of a singular word, one, that is written in 4 different scripts. We have one written as a foundational hand, a narrow foundational hand which just compressed those letters together. We have a black letter example. This would get into more high Gothic. where we start losing the roundness of the letters and it's replaced with these angles. It's the same spacing about, maybe a little bit more narrow than the narrow foundational hand. And then we could end up with like a pointed Gothic where we get these sharp points on the tops and bottoms of our letters rather than the more squared look. So we want to identify how wide is that letter in relationship of the N and the O. When we look at the foundational hand, we can see that this O is very round, whereas with the black letter, we can see that the legs are all about the same width as the white space between the letters. So it makes it a very tight hand. So the narrow, medium, or wideness of the letter is the first thing that we want to look at. The second thing that we want to look at, especially when we're dealing with the ends, is the shapes of the arches. So here we can see rounded tops. So this would be a rounded arch, And that arch can be rounded, slightly pointed, or very pointed. And so we can see that these arches are very pointed arches. And so we want to look at the arch because that shape of the arch affects the shape of the letter. Then we want to look at the branching location. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit closer on that example, and I hope it will focus. No, it's not going to quite want to focus for me. So the branching of the letter, where does that arch come off from the main stem? We have 3 examples of a high branch. In all of our earlier examples were all high branching ends. If that branch comes down lower, we have a medium branch, or we can branch all the way from the bottom and we end up with a low branch. So we can have a high, a medium, or a low branch. And we want to look at our example text or our exemplar to see where is that branching coming from. Then we have a slant. And the slant is one that I'll show you how we would measure it on an extant example. All of these other things of the shapes of letters are things that we just notice by paying attention to our exemplar or the example we're looking at. But the slant is something that we can measure. So we can have an upright slant where the letter is just straight up and down at 90 degrees to the baseline. We can end up with a forward slant to the letter or an extreme slant that we start seeing more slants, especially in the italic hands. So let's switch back over to our example and look at how we would measure a slant. Okay, I've pulled up a new example sheet up here because the other one was getting a lot of lines on it. And I've drawn on here the baseline and the x height line, just like we did with the other example. And what we're going to do is just put our straight edge up against the vertical strokes and make a couple of marks there. And you can see when we do this that most of the letters, there's a couple exceptions here, are all at about the same angle. We see, I highlighted this R here, which goes backwards a little bit. Here's a B, which this stroke comes forward. That's the only B on here, so I might look at these slants, and I just measure these angles with a protractor. So if I measure this is a 0 to about a 2 degree slant. So I would call this an upright form. But with this one B being forward, I want to know, is that B a mistake on this document, or is that what this hand really looked like. So I would look for other B's. Another example is this D. If we look at this D, it has a slight lean backwards. So I would look for other D's as well. This R, which comes back, I checked, there's an R and it's upright. If I check these R's down here, they're all uprights. So I would say that this R is not an example of the ideal for this form. They're upright letters in this script. So that's how we would measure the slant. And we're going to look at our document or our exemplar and look at the averages of all of them to get a general idea for the hand. But then we're going to look for some of those exceptions like the B or the D or this R that might stand out to our eye, saying the angle of that is not the same as the other letters. All right, I've been trying to use this reed pen. Reed pens don't hold a lot of ink, and I had an ink that I think was a little too thick, so it wasn't flowing. So I've ground up some ink, and hopefully this will work better for us. So for serifs, for a serif, we're looking at the beginning and the ends of letters, or the heads and the feet of letters. One serif mark is called a tick. And a tick is when we just have a small little line like that. And I picked up my pen, but you normally wouldn't pick up your pen. And then you'd have your stroke and then your end of the letter. And whatever the angle of the letter is, you just see these little tick marks at the beginning and the ends of the letter shapes. We can have rolled serifs where, similar to a tick, rather than going up, we're going to make a little bit of a curvy shape to our rolled. We can be slightly up like that. We can start fairly flat out with no upward stroke. You might even have more of an upward stroke. Right, so we can have rolled serifs. We can have a slab serif, where a slab serif, rather than the tick mark, we start at our pen angle and we just have a horizontal stroke, and then we would come down and we have slabs. We might even have a slab serif where we go all the way across. We might come back. So we end up with a top like that. Some strokes will have no serif. We could end up with slabs on the bottom, a slab at the top, and a different kind of slab at the bottom. It can change. We might have a slab at the top and the bottom. This ink is pretty thin. I hope it's showing up on the screen that you can see what's going on, but just trying to give you the impression of what's going on. I don't want to spend too much time grinding this ink up. So we have tick marks. Rolled. Slabs. Right. We also have bracketed serifs, and a bracketed serif would be done in two strokes, where we might start with a tick mark, we'd come down, and then we'd have a second stroke that would come up here and fill in that tick mark space. It could also be done in one stroke. I might go up and back, come up like that. Another kind of bracketed serif is we might have a line coming down like this, right, where
we come in, we go up, tick mark, and we come back down. So they can be done in multiple strokes or single strokes, and that can change. We can then end up with bracketed slabs, where, if remember, we have our slab, and we would come down. Well, what if I started with a slab and then rolled it back down this side? So we end up with this curvy shape here. So we have our slab, but then we have a bracket. So we might even go here, change our pen angle. Right? Kind of like that. And then you can have a lozenge, which in many ways is going to be similar to a slab, where rather than going across, we're going to, like a black letter, this is common. We're going to start here with our pen angle. We're going to come down, change our pen angle, and come down like this. Or it might be spurred, where we have kind of this diamond shape at the top of our letter. So paying attention to the serifs of your letters affects the shape. Some letters, we might have a serif on one part and not have a serif on the end. But on the second stroke, we might end up with an exit serif. Or we might end up having a serif on every stroke. And I apologize for using this ink. It's quite thin. Occasionally, in some hands, we'll have a mixing and a matching of different kinds of serifs at the beginning and the ends. So maybe we have a script where we have a lozenge style serif on our vertical strokes for like our ends. No serif on the feet of the first stroke, but then we have a roll serif on the second stroke. So the serifs can change, and we want to just look at our examples to identify which letters have what types of serifs. Usually, within a text, the serifs are all going to follow the same patterns. If you've been joining me the whole way through this series so far, you now know your skeletal letter forms for the foundational hand, and we've just gone over the 7 characteristics of writing. Those things are going to be used as we move forward in understanding and analyzing what we've done good in our own calligraphy, what we can do better in our own calligraphy, and analyzing historical text and other people's works to improve our own or try to replicate it. In our next video, we're going to get out our pens and paper and talk about how to use a dip pen and get ink on the page. I'm going to have to figure out some camera things. Up to this point, the camera's been to my side, and I've been writing off to the side, which makes it difficult. And to get the best examples to you, I'm trying to figure out a way to get the camera to be able to show straight on what I'm doing. And I'm playing around with that. So it might be a little bit longer for that video as I figure out the right setup. But my goal is to still have it out before the end of this week. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button if you've been liking this series, or if you want to know when the next video comes out. It will help me out tremendously build up this channel, and maybe we can keep going on with other projects and continue to explore calligraphy or leatherwork or bookbinding and all the other things that I've got some videos on the channel about. With that concludes this video. We ask you to be safe, keep learning, be kind, and help those around you.